right, so today we are looking at 3 issues, and we will start with the OpenTelemetry integration. I should probably look at the design document instead, right, rather than the issue here, because the issue probably doesn't do much for us. Oh, and now we have this beautiful thing.
Right.
Hold on. I'm only 2 clicks away. Perfect. All right.
Cool. Yeah. If you remember about like a couple of previews back, I mean, we exposed the new APIs in system diagnostics activity just to address the scenarios of the OpenTelemetry and to be able to give the libraries and applications the ability to publish tracing just depending on the PCL only. I mean, you don't have to get any external dependency. So this APIs, I mean, like after we expose that, this APIs is used in implementing the OpenTelemetry SDK itself. I mean, just to prove that like the APIs is addressing all OpenTelemetry scenarios that we are addressing here. So this changes that we are proposing today is just the feedback we got from this activity about how when the API is used in the OpenTelemetry SDK. I mean, like what kind of scenarios that it's kind of like blocked, or it need to be like enhanced just to address the scenarios that it in the OpenTelemetry. So this is the introduction. I mean, like, we can go to the list now. I mean, and we can address every point. So the first one is activity context. Activity context is one of the new types that we exposed in previous previews. And the activity context, if you remember, it contains like trace ID, span ID, flags, and state. And in OpenTelemetry, they have something is called isRemote, which is telling if this context is created from a remote parent or it's not. So isRemote is not something new. I mean, we were aware about it before, but there was some like debates or questions regarding it. But after discussing it with OpenTelemetry guys, and like they decided about like this is very important to have, and we need to have it in our APIs. So basically, I'm just adding a new property. It's called isRemote, which is just Boolean. And also I mean, like we have the original constructor. I'm adding optional parameter at the end. It's called isRemote equal false. So this is basically just to support isRemote property. Any feedback on that?
Has this constructor already released, or is it new in 5?
It's released in the previous preview, but yeah, so we adding extra parameter. I'm expecting like later you will see also we have some kind of breaking changes. So we're changing a couple of things that we already exposed. So we'll come to that. But so I'm expecting like, this is kind of breaking change from the previous previews, but there is no breaking change from what we released before.
Right. So there's never been a stable package with these types in it.
No.
Okay.
Do we anticipate adding more parameters in the future?
No, specifically for this activity context is not. I mean, like, I'm not expecting like we will add more to that.
What do OpenTelemetry consumers use this property for?
This actually it's kind of like, while implementing something like sampler or something like this, so we send the parent context to the listener, and listener is used by the sampler, and the sampler maybe can decide to take some decisions according to that, if the parent is really a remote context or just a local context. Any more questions regarding that?
I mean, my only concern with is remote is it sounds like the instance itself is remote, which is not the case, but I also don't have an idea for how to name it any better.
Remote
Actually,
source.
this is, the name came from OpenTelemetry itself. I mean, like it's we didn't invent this name. I mean, they are using exactly the same name.
Are we implementing OpenTelemetry APIs directly, or are we trying to make a .NET version of it?
We are not strictly implementing the OpenTelemetry directly, but we are trying to be as close as much as we can with OpenTelemetry. So we are trying to reduce the confusion between, like, somebody using OpenTelemetry or somebody using BCL. I mean, like, they can easily understand or relate between the APIs.
Okay.
I mean, we generally, our stance generally is we don't just implement specs, right? We generally try to make BCL APIs that are self-consistent with the rest of the platform first, because the problem is not that we don't like the specs. The problem is that specs are fundamentally not consistent with each other either, and we implement more than one external protocol or standard or spec, right? And I think the question now becomes, if we do this over time, like what happens to the BCL, right? So that's why I personally don't care that they will call it is remote. The question is just, if I see is remote as a .NET developer, does that make sense to me? But as I said, I don't have a better name for this either. Like, it's just that remote reminds me of remoting, and that is maybe not the best association here, but
yeah. Okay. Yeah, next is activity.kind. So in activity class, we have exposed a property called kind, which is return activity kind. This is already exposed, but the property that we exposed before was just getter, so there was no setters for it. And we run into some scenario about in OpenTelemetry, they have the adapters that they are listening to the activity events, like activity start, activity stop, and they are listening to the activities that created the old way, which is like people just constructed using the constructor. And of course, I mean, like, the old activities doesn't have any kind. I mean, like, the kind property is not there anyway. I mean, and they wanted, I mean, the adapter in the OpenTelemetry, they wanted to set the right kind on the created activity when they receive the events, so the samplers can do its job. I mean, using this kind of activity. So the change here is just exposing the setter. I mean, this is the only change in this part.
Can they do the same thing by adding more attributes or something like that? Like, it seems like this is a back compat scenario. Like, other ways to do it, because it seems like changing kind in the middle of activity processing is a slightly dangerous operation. Like, what if first sampler decides to change activity kind to something else, and then the second sampler sees a new value? Like, we were very careful by allowing changing the name with, like, I think we even added a method instead of making the property settable. So being able to change kind whenever might, like, lead to hard to debug issues when, like, one part of the system changes kind and then the other part of the system doesn't see it. So if the only motivation is these back compat scenarios, can we figure them out through other means?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing about, like, if you use this data and you want to somehow to send it to some other party, which is not, I mean, like, some customized pieces, which is expect, like, to have this right kind on the activity. I'm not sure this is having like some attribute or something like this will work in that scenario. But yeah, I understand your point. But how this would be dangerous? I mean, to change the kind in the middle. I mean, like for other activity.
I mean, the same way you're enabling things to work by changing the kind, by switching from internal to something meaningful. Switching kind from something meaningful to something less meaningful would break other consumers. Like if you have 4 exporters, right? 2 of them would prefer kind internal and 2 of them would prefer kind client. So which one do you set in adapter? The one that would break the first 2 or the one that would break second 2?
Yeah, actually, so the adapter is mainly, I mean, like listening to the client, HTTP client or SBNet, and I think they have a clear idea about, like, you know, what kind of activity that is coming from such components. So they have a, like, you know, HTTP client. It will be like a client kind. I mean, like, so there is no confusion about like setting a different values there. But I'm not sure about like if there is any other scenarios that people can change that while they can break some other parts. Yeah.
We would also try to keep activities like less mutable past creation, because then like samplers cannot react to stuff and things like that, right? So I don't know if this scenario is only motivated by supporting old activities, maybe we should just fix those, or move this information via a tag or an attribute, like detected kind, that exporters would know how to consume. Just not make one of the major properties on activity immutable, just to fix that.
Let me try to ping Seiju. I mean, like the guy who is using implementing the adapters there. I mean, like, so he may give some more feedback about that. Just 1 second. Okay, maybe you can move on. I mean, like, leave this pending, and if Seiju joined, I mean, we can rediscuss it again.
Yeah, I wrote it down. I mean, I generally agree with Pavel. Like, it seems unfortunate to change a major invariant of this only for a backwards compat quirk or hack or whatever you want to call this, but on the other hand, I have to admit I don't see like what we would do differently without like making it super complicated now.
Yeah, I mean, how hard is it to clone an activity into a new activity with just the kind being different? If it's easy, then I would say the activity should not let this change, and if somebody has a complicated serialization need, they can change it with a clone.
Yeah, but the concern here is allocations. I mean, like, we are trying to reduce the allocations, because this means that
then
the adapter
they can work around their serialization problem.
Yeah, the adapter is listening to every activity created from like SBNet or HTTP clients. This means that we are cloning every single activity, which would be a huge cost. Yeah.
I mean, the question also is like, where would you do this? Like you said, you have to assign the property, but when would that assignment happen?
When's the assignment happen?
Yeah, when would you mutate it?
So the adapter is just a listener to the old activities. So when any activity gets started or stopped, So the adapter will receive this event, and at that time, the adapter will just set the right kind on the activity at that time.
Right.
And later, the SDK, I mean the OpenTelemetry SDK will receive this activity, and it will send it like to the sampler, for example. I mean, the sampler can use this kind in the activity to decide to do something with it. So this is how it works. I mean, like the whole chain.
Are we planning to enable this adapter on like, .NET Framework and older versions of .NET Core? Because supposedly the new .NET Core, we can just produce nice activities for everyone to consume, right?
What you mean? I mean, like, you know, what you will do with the HTTP client, for example. I mean,
It would produce activity with the correct kind, because we now have the kind property and can set it.
But I don't think we can change that now, because this is going to break all the listeners that listening to all the activities, right?
But you are saying that all the activities didn't even have the kind property, so nobody was reading it before. So setting it now is...
No, I'm not talking about the kind specifically. I mean, I'm talking about the app compat in general, about like, you know, if we change how we produce the activity on the HTTP client today, I mean, it will break all the listeners, because the listeners will not get these events anymore.
We can produce both kinds. We know how to distinguish between subscriptions.
Yeah, but do we have a time to do that now? I mean, like just to change the whole HTTP client and ASP.NET to do that?
I mean, we would eventually have to.
Yeah,
because we cannot
eventually.
We
but
cannot
now,
rely on adapters to fix things up in these activities, right? We would do that work somewhere else, and then only OpenTelemetry would be able to consume the right information, and like everyone else would get internals forever. But I think if we scope back to just kind, setting the correct kind on activities is not a break and change, because the property never existed. So
That's right.
we can set it even on the existing HTTP client or ASP.NET activities.
It also seems to me that like if you like, it sounds like what you're proposing, Tarek, is that the listener is assigning the kind. Is that right?
Not the listener. I mean, whoever creates the activity is the one which is decided about it. So the way it works about like if you want to create a new activity in the new world, so you call activity source.start activity, and one of the parameters you pass is the kind. So when we create the activity, so we will create it with the right kind that passed to us, and later anybody can use this kind activity. I mean kind property to do whatever they want.
Sure, like, but I still don't understand. Like, okay, if that's the case, then why would you ever have to set it after the fact?
To support the old way how the activities get created before. I mean, like if somebody created the activity using the constructor, which is they don't have any chance or any way to set the kind at all. So if somebody got any activity created the old way, they always have the kind set to internal.
So does that mean that you should just make the constructor internal and there will be a breaking change when they upgrade and they'll fix to the correct code and you didn't need to make this be settable?
I don't think we can make the constructor internal. I mean, like there could be some other scenarios that maybe it makes sense to use the constructor. So one example of it, I mean, like today, I mean, like while in activity source, while we start activity, we just create and start activity in both in same time. So if you want just to create activity and not starting it, so the constructor will be the way to do that.
Okay, so a construct. I mean, like, really, this is the, like, maybe it would make sense as an init-only property if that compiler feature was in a supported language version, but it's not. And so, like, init-only might make sense, but really it seems like you're either missing a constructor parameter or the factory method that is currently the only thing setting it should be the only way to build it. but you have two ways of building something, and they have a disparity. So if the kind is a required property, then you should adjust the constructor to make it a required property. And yeah, it'll be a breaking change, but it's a breaking change from a preview to a stable, and that's better than making a thing in the API that you don't want, because API lasts forever and bugs last for a release.
The other thing is, it seems like this is a tiny part of the conversation of bringing activities we produce into the new ecosystem we created for the new listeners and the OpenTelemetry stuff. So like this might fix one issue that we found, but like how many issues haven't we found? And I would rather get some strategy around that than start fixing these corner cases that we discover one by one.
Yeah, also, like, I mean, to be clear, activity exists since .NET Core 2.0, right? So does the constructor, right? But I mean, there's no reason why we couldn't add a new constructor overload that takes an activity kind in, for example, right? So that seems like if people use constructors today, that seems less problematic to me to tell them, yeah, to use the overload to pass in the activity kind than making the kind settable on the activity. Because to me, between init only and the constructor argument, it's just syntactic difference, right? It should not matter for the call side.
Yeah. So activity here is, well, activity context has never shipped. Activity is new. Or sorry, other way around.
Yeah, the other way around.
Activity is new. Sorry, activity is old.
Okay.
Yeah, activity kind is new. Activity context is new.
Okay, I thought all of this was new. So I was starting at the wrong state.
Yeah. So I think Siju and Riley joined now. I mean, we can ask them about what they think. So Siju, Riley, I mean, like we are discussing about exposing the activity.kind setter property. And I think Pavel have saying that like maybe we can just use some attribute or something to work around this, because this is needed only for app compat. I mean for all the compat activity, and it's not really useful for the new APIs. Also, it could be like dangerous. I mean to change the kind on the activity after it gets created. So what do you think about that?
So before you talk, quick heads up, this meeting is streamed to YouTube, so just keep this in mind. If you want to change your answer based on that.
Yeah, I understand. So may I understand what's the alternative approach, like having additional layers similar like how we have the, like I remember we have some string information in the activity as well, where we can update the name and we introduce a thing called display name, something like that. So is this the same thing we're trying to add?
No, I mean, so activity.kind is purely new thing. I mean, it didn't exist in activity before. But first time when we exposed it, we exposed the getter on. So the only way to have the right kind on the activity is while you are creating the activity itself. This is the only chance you set the kind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the alternative, I mean, like, you know, one of the Bubbles idea is just use some like kind of attribute or tags on the activity to set the kind, and later you can consume this tag instead.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, two things that seem plausible to me would be either from the bucket of tags, you figure out if it has the default value, which would need to be something different than something it can be explicitly set to. But if it has the default value, then you'll go find it based on a tag and maybe remember it or not. I don't know if your tags are immutable. The other would be that whatever the default value is, that the setter only works while it has the default value, but once it's given an explicit value, the setter then throws, which would be effectively an init only property.
I see. In this way, it sounds like we're trying to have this mechanism just for the internal workaround, and it's not something we'd like to expose to external customers, or at least telling them like this is a way they should use. On the other side, by making this a public like get set method, it's more like we're giving the recommendation for customers. If you have legacy activity and you also need this feature, this is the right way for you to do, for you to work around. So I wonder, like, if the intention is we want to scope this down only for our like existing like ASP.NET or the legacy systems, or we believe there's a potential use for folks outside Microsoft as well.
Let me ask a quick question. Do we plan to use this mechanism to support .NET Framework or .NET Core 2030, where we didn't have new activity classes and we're not producing new style of activities?
We already support that. Like, we already support collecting HTTP client, ASP.NET, ASP.NET Core from older versions.
Right, but you were planning to use this feature to keep supporting those and change activity kind for them?
Yeah, do we have
Yes.
any other alternative? Like, because I don't think there is any other alternative for us to support the already shipped versions of these libraries.
Okay, I think we, like for new customer, I don't think we should advertise this feature for new customers and use it internally to enable collecting from old ASP.NET, old .NET Framework, and then for for the new customers, just tell them to use new style of activity and where they can set kind the way we intended it to be set.
Yeah, so that makes perfect sense. This is only an issue for like all those libraries which are instrumented using the old way. For anyone who is onboarding to the activity source/activity, then they would be setting it in the intended way, like you said. But we ask for this to be settable only for handling the legacy scenarios. But if there is a way around it, then I'm fine with that. But I'm not yet clear what is that way around.
So would adding a tag or an attribute to a legacy activity that would mark the preferred kind that we detected work? Or am I missing some scenario where that doesn't work?
Yeah, it will work for all the Microsoft internal like stuff. For customers, there might be one scenario. So
Cool.
that
seems enough.
Yeah. So if there's a third party customer, they have legacy libraries that is instrumenting the old activity. By making this get set, we're basically giving them the message that they can use this method to move forward. If we use something like a custom property or a hidden tag, basically we're telling the customers this is not the official supported path, and you have to reinsert your old library.
I would prefer the latter.
Okay. Yeah, I'm fine with that.
So essentially, instead of using the setter, we store the kind as a special tag, which we don't really publicize.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is more for Microsoft only, not exposed to external customers.
We are not breaking external customers because they didn't have kind property before and they're not getting it now. But we're not taking features from them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So how does
and to get new features, you have to use new activity ecosystem, infrastructure, whatever.
Yes, that part I understood. So my question was, how about exporters? Like, because exporters expect the kind to be coming from activity.kind. They don't really know how the activity was generated. So we use some special methods like activity.getKind, and internally we figure it out either from tags or the actual kind itself.
Well, I would expect you to change the setter, the getter in activity.kind, right? To just say, like, let me look for the tag. If the tag is present, then I return whatever that thing is. Otherwise, I return the actually stored kind.
Okay, and this is something which we have to handle, right? Not from the activity class itself. Like, we handle it in OpenTelemetry in our own way, right?
No, I think the suggestion would be to actually change it in activity itself, so that somebody who actually just queries for the kind, that would get the updated kind.
But that effectively gives us a setter that's
Yeah, I mean, like, it depends on what you want
That's
to
worse.
do with it. Like that, I guess if you want it transparent, then that's what you would have to do, right? You would just basically less advertise the backdoor, right?
So we could, I mean, like, I'm not necessarily recommending that, but we could internally, I mean, the implementation, we will expose the setter as I'm proposing it, but we allow the setter will be allowed only if you created old way activities. But if you created it with a new way, we will not allow that.
Well,
this will be very confusing. I mean, like when.
Yeah, I mean, that's effectively a one-time call setter.
Right.
Which,
yeah.
Like, I think making a semi-init only property is reasonable. Essentially, what you want in the property setter is, in addition to setting the field, it sets another Boolean saying whether the value is real or not. And if it was set via the setter, which, assuming it's either whether it's public or internal, if once the value's been set via the setter, you don't search for the tag anymore. But if the setter had never been called, then you'll search for the tag.
But the only concern is like the consumer of the activity, how they will know that the setter is called before or not. I mean, like, this is will be the question about, like,
yeah, I guess I still struggle with this notion of like existing customers, because I mean, if we have an existing customer and we ask them to call the setter, then why wouldn't that existing customer who can call the setter also construct the activity in a different way? That's the thing I just don't understand. Like, we ask them to change code regardless, right?
I think it's the consumer is the one who wants it set, and the producer is the one who needs to set it.
Yeah, consumer is like OpenTelemetry exporter, which exports to some backend.
Right, but that's kind of what I said earlier to Tarek. That sounds to me like somebody who consumes an activity is now mutating the instance effectively just to get to different data, and that seems problematic.
Yeah, I mean, would this be better solved if activity kind, right now its zero value is internal, which has meaning. If we inserted a different zero value, which is unknown, and then it would be up to the consumer that if activity kind comes back as unknown, they need to now figure out what to do about that. Like, you're telling them no activity kind was provided.
Yeah, I need to check, like, because the spec for OpenTelemetry says the default should be internal. Like, there is nothing like unknown.
Yeah, we talked about this during the last review.
But this activity class apparently predates our notion of integrating with OpenTelemetry, so we have to deal with the fact that we have a thing that predates OpenTelemetry. The create from activity, if it has a defaulted parameter, that can certainly default to internal, but this type doesn't represent an OpenTelemetry activity. It represents old stuff plus OpenTelemetry activity. Now you have that problem. I mean, you could do another Boolean, which is activity kind is known, but that seems weird.
Right.
Yeah, but in the same time, about like activity kind is fully new thing. I mean, like,
I guess there's an easy answer. Activity kind becomes nullable of activity kind, and it defaults to null. So it doesn't have one, or it does, and then now you don't have to deal with the fact that you've changed the numbers from the spec.
Yeah, I'm not sure that makes it better though, but yeah.
Well, it makes it clear to the consumer that they need to handle the case where they are looking at an activity that for one reason or another didn't have a kind.
Yeah.
Quick question. I know we have two styles of diagnostic source methods. Some of them produce activities and some we just get a callback. Can, instead of trying to adapt an existing activity that old code produced, can we subscribe to the callback that doesn't create an activity and create a new style of activity on our own? So we this would allow us to avoid the entire trying to modify the old activity story.
Yeah, the concern is, I mean, we explored that, and the concern is the allocations. I mean, like, this will require us to, or require the OpenTelemetry to create a new activity for every callback.
Yes, but we are getting rid of an old activity, so it's the same amount of allocations, right? There are ways to subscribe to diagnostic sources that do not let them create activities.
I'm not aware of that way because we only listen to diagnostic source like on or off. Activity is like not really part of the callback. It's like something like implicit. We just get it using dot. So it's always created when you subscribe using diagnostic source.
So yeah, so my understanding is like HTTP client or SBNet is creating the activity anyway, right?
If there is a subscriber, yes.
Yeah. I mean, like if there is a subscriber, yes.
Yes, that's what my understanding as well. So there is no way to prevent them from creating the activity. We only have to like ignore it and recreate a new one, which we tried and gave up because of the new allocation.
So given that we know 45 minutes in, like I suggest maybe we should take this particular issue offline and reconsider the design options we have here, maybe with a smaller group, because I think we probably want to make some progress on the other proposals here, at least see, you know, whether there's more issues or whether we generally like the rest.
Okay, so if the smaller group decided to take it or to leave it, this would be the decision at that time?
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah,
Okay.
I guess the question is, like, how do you respond to Pavel's criticism that it seems problematic to have a core concept like kind mutable after the fact in general, right? And I think that's probably a very fair criticism.
Yeah, I would recommend a design that is not openly mutable. So if you need the public setter, then it would need to understand you've already started the activity, you've already done things with the activity. It shouldn't allow this to change anymore, whatever that means. And that would be my recommendation.
Okay.
Yep. So the general agreement is we don't want the setter, but like a smaller group can decide like how we work around that limitation, right?
Yeah, I think I mean, having a setter that basically blows up with like too late to change exception kind of thing, right? Like that seems unfortunate, but at least I think that's workable. I think the primary concern from Pavel is that you have an activity flowing through the system and then all of a sudden, very late in the game, somebody decides to change the kind, but now you have like half the information with the old kind, half the information with the new kind, right? That seems bad.
Yep. Correct.
All right, so then let's go on with activity attributes.
Yes. So today, activity have something called tags, which is a key value pairs from string to string. And in OpenTelemetry, they have exactly the same concept, but it's called attribute. But the difference is they can map from string key to any kind of object or different kind of objects. Like it can be numerics, it can be Boolean, it can be arrays, it can be something else. It's not necessarily to be string value. So the proposal here is like we are exposing a new way, I mean, to set these attributes to be from key to object instead of key to string. In the same time, we are keeping the compatibility, so we are not changing the behavior of the tags today, which is string to string. And you can think about the attributes as like a superset of the tags now. So the proposal here is to have a new method. It's called set attribute, which is you can set the key and the value, and we will have a property called attributes, which is can return you the IEnumerable. This should be IEnumerable, not IEnumerator, of key value pair of string and objects.
What would we tell customers? What should they use? Set attribute or set tag or add tag?
Yeah, moving forward, I would say we recommend set attribute, and as a set attribute will be the superset of the tags.
So would attribute enumerator return the tags too?
Yeah. As I mentioned, it will be superset of the tags. Okay. So if somebody call add tag, it will get added to the attributes. It will be just one list, but while we're returning the tags, we filter only the strings. If we return the attributes, we will return the whole set.
Can we fix tags somehow? add an add tag overload and another way to enumerate them that would also return objects?
I don't think so, because it returns enumerable of string, key value pair of string and string.
But imagine we add like tags with objects property that would return string to object. Like I don't. What I'll tell you my worry. My worry is that like basically tags is one of the most useful things you do with activity. You attach nice information to it and make it available to all the consumers. Now we are forking our main API and considering our convoluted obsolescence story. It's slightly scary. And considering main thing that customers use is the add method. And we can fix that by adding another overload. And we can figure out how to do enumeration in the way that works. So I'm slightly worried about forking everything just to get object values.
Yeah, basically you now have three concepts, right? You have baggage, tags, and attributes, right? And they differ very subtly. Like the difference is very subtle.
Yeah.
I agree with that. My problem is I don't think there's an easy way to avoid that, because adding an overload for add tag that takes object would be fine, but then the question is, what do you do on the outside? And so you would at least have something else like tags typed or something, right? Or tag objects or something that is parallel to the text that returns an enumerable of key value pair right now. And so you would at least have to tell customers use the other thing, because otherwise you're suddenly two-stringing the objects into strings, right?
And that may be fine, right? I would say that is still better than having another concept.
Just as the other thing I want to point at, if we have overload like add tags, which is take object, so OpenTelemetry specs define the way to add new attribute or new tags. It's not the same way that we used to add the tags. For example, about they are saying that if you add a new attribute which is with the key that is already added before, so you update the value, not adding a new value. So this means that the new API or the new overload will have a different behavior than the old overload we have.
We don't have to implement that part, right? Like this is a part that, like, considering.
So what do you suggest for people to do then? I mean, they have to implement it themselves, right?
To do what? For people to do
to ensure the behavior.
I mean, we can add set tag method and add tag overload. I'm okay adding like helpers around tags concepts. What I kind of want to avoid is having another concept. Like it took me 2 years to remember what's the difference between tags and baggages.
Yeah, I think that's that's the thing I agree with. The trouble is, and I think that's something we probably need to look into, is like there's also this problem of this half pregnant state, right, where you kind of merge the concepts, but then you get broken by subtleties that you didn't expect. So for example, it would be very bad if add tag would now suddenly also override and not just add and throw an exception if the key already exists. So in that case, you would have to at least add set tag and add tag overloads, right? Which is fine, but then the question is what happens when you like mix and match now with two-string, right? So we would have to make sure that the behavior that we get of these APIs are at least self-consistent, and then get away with the fact saying that yes, things are called tags, not attribute for activity, but which seems fine. But that will basically be the work we would have to do.
Right. I mean, but the other people that using OpenTelemetry today, I mean, they are not that familiar with tags anyway. I mean, like they using attribute names.
Right, but
so this is why we decided just to have this name so we'll be consistent all over. I mean, like.
Well, the problem is like you're not entirely consistent either, right? Because basically the question now is if I'm using this API by itself, right? Like I'm not an OpenTelemetry person. I'm just a person using the BCL trying to make sense of this. You present to me now baggage, tags, and attributes. How do I magically know that what I really want to use is attributes?
Yeah, I mean, from the method signature, you can understand that. I mean, you're setting either a string, or you're setting a string object, right? I mean, yeah.
Sure, but basically what you're saying is that
today, I mean, like, between tags and baggage. I mean, like, how you decide to use baggage and how to use that, decide to use tags. Yeah. You have to go back, I mean, read some like the documentation or something on the methods to understand the difference. Yeah, so this would be the same case.
Yeah, so don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say like, attributes are the worst idea ever, right? But like I think the general problem that I think we need to somehow think about is that these APIs are already complicated, right? That's the thing that we have received this feedback multiple times. And it seems like this is not necessarily helping this, right? It adds one more concept to a type that already is not necessarily super easy to use. And then the question really becomes, in the long run, like, is this helping or hurting, right? Because you also, like, as you said, you already say attributes is a superset of tags. So you basically have to round trip those within that as well. And now the question is the result understandable, right? Or are we trying, like, are we adding too many concepts that this type is now this super convoluted thing where it neither works as a BCL type nor as an OpenTelemetry equivalent, right? That's kind of my concern, that we bolt on too many things where it becomes hard to understand. And I'm not sure attributes is the thing that kicks it over, but like it's certainly an example of something where the only reason we add this is because the API ship that we have is slightly different from what OpenTelemetry wants.
Yeah. From my point of view about, like, we adding those because activity today doesn't support that. This is the only thing that I care about.
But if you rephrase it like this, right? If you say our problem is that tags are only strings, then I think the solution to that would, and the other thing is we only support add, not set. I think in that sense, the fix for that would be we wouldn't introduce a new concept. We would just add overloads to the existing concept, right? The only reason why we have now attributes is because OpenTelemetry happened to call it attributes as well, right?
Yes.
So in that sense, right. I think Pavel is right. Like if the two things you want to fix is accept objects as well and allow setting, we would just add more overloads.
Okay, and the property to return the list, how you are going to do that?
Yeah, so this one you would have to call differently, right? We would either have to say that tags only returns the things that are string typed, or we would have to say tags returns the objects to stringed. So that's something that you would have to decide what the better outcome is. And we would probably introduce a new property and then obsolete the old one and tell people, like, use the other one instead.
But how this would be different than what we're proposing here? I mean, like, it's exactly the same.
No, it's fewer concepts. Like, it's one less concept in the area where we already have too many. And like, it's one more is 50% more. And as Ima said, this type is hard to use already. So adding, like, knowing at least between tags and baggage, there was a real difference. And you better understand it before you use the type, right? Or you'll waste all your network bandwidth transferring stuff around. But between tags and attributes, the difference is so minor and finicky and tricky that, like, it's not worth having a concept for that. And considering most people would only create instances of activity and set values, and only very rarely consume them, we can even create a method that enumerates tags, and exporters would use it, and that's fine. But 90% of our customer base who add tags wouldn't be affected at all.
I mean, the other question is like how common are tags being used, right? If they're one of the most popular things on this type, you're basically swimming against the mainstream, right? If it's very rarely used, then I don't think it matters. You could just do one or the other. We can either do what Pavel suggested, or we can literally just obsolete the two properties, sorry, the property and the method, and then hide them and say activity never had tags, right? But like the problem with hiding is that hiding only really works if the thing is rarely used. If the thing is super popular, then the problem isn't the fact that it's in IntelliSense. The problem is that everybody has to update their code base. But if you don't obsolete it, then the problem is you do basically permanently present people with there's tags and there's attributes. And I think that's, and then you would tell people like, well, you probably don't want to use tags ever. You probably only want to use attributes. And then we are basically back to square one, where in order to really get this guidance across, you kind of have to obsolete the thing.
Okay, so what is the suggestion here? I mean, like to have overloads for add tags, for example, and to have a new property to return the new list.
Yeah, I think what I would probably do is I would basically add an overload to add tag, the tags object. I would add a new method called set tag that it gives you key and object. And I would add a new property called, I don't know, tag objects or something that gives you back an IEnumerable of key value pair of string comma object, and then obsolete the one that returns you just the strings.
How frequent is the scenario where we need to override the tag? Can we get away with having a bool override parameter so we don't clutter the API surface with more stuff?
Yeah, I mean, in that case, I would probably literally go with a new method group, because there already are set methods on activity anyway. So we already have set ID format, set parent ID, and it seems like set tag would be more consistent than an add that takes an overload, that takes an override property. Sorry, parameter. Because it's also not what we usually do in the BCL, right? We don't really have add with override semantics.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we'll have add tag overload, we'll have set tag, and we'll have a new property like tags something, right?
Well, you can pretend that the S in tag stands for strings. We add a new property called tag O. No, I mean, like, I think you probably need like tag objects or something.
Okay. Okay, I'm fine with that. I mean, Sejo, Riley, do you have any?
I mean, I don't have objection as long as we have a way to set tag and retrieve all the tags set. So I'm fine with it.
So
I think this is very close to what we originally proposed. We just changed it to attribute somewhere in the middle. So we were okay with the original one as well. So we're fine. Sorry, Riley, you were saying something?
Yeah, so one minor question. So the add semantic allows you to have duplicated keys, right? So you can add like foo equals to 1 and later foo equals to a string hello world. And with this, like for adding the object, do we expect that to have the same behavior, or basically we will override the existing one if the key does exist?
No, we have two methods. One is called add tags and one is called set tags. So add tags, it is going to add anyway. I mean, it will not override anything. But for set tags, it's going to override the key. I mean, the value of the key if the key is existing before. So we have two methods, not just one.
And when we provide the overload, which accepts the object, do we also have the add tag, which takes the object, or we only allow setting?
No, add tags which takes the object, one of the proposal, yes.
Okay, thanks for clarification.
Okay.
Yeah, no more question from my side.
Okay.
That works for me for OpenTelemetry, I think.
Yeah, it works for OpenTelemetry. So we are good from that side.
Okay, sounds good. Let's move to the next. So the next one is regarding the, as we see, I mean, like activity is supporting tags or attributes. And OpenTelemetry, as I mentioned, defining the ways that you should have the attribute collection created. Like it has to be in order. If you set a new attribute, you have to override the old one. And they have also extra thing about like if you set the null value, it will remove the entry from the attributes. And the attributes get used in other different places, like in links, activity link, and it's used in activity event. So, and both the activity link and activity event, while you constructed it, you passing the attributes to it. So we are just proposing to have a new type, collection type for the attributes, which can conform to what the OpenTelemetry specs is recommending. I think this was suggested in the first round of the APIs last previews, and we said that it's not needed during that time because consumers can use just list. But right now, I mean, after defining more requirements for it, the list will be not enough for that. And so the proposal here is just providing a new collection type just to be easy for consumers to create the attributes collection or attributes list.
Let me clarify. Why would this matter for .NET developers? Like .NET developers are used to collections working or lists working in one way or another. Like, why would they want to set something to null to delete an item when what they used to is calling the remove method to delete an item?
I think it's the same way that it was just suggested by the OpenTelemetry themselves. I mean, they added this for good reason, I believe, right?
I think it might be like it might be a leftover of some language implementation. Like I'm not sure how dictionaries are implemented in Java, but I suspect that like adding an item with null might be the way to remove the key or something like that. So like as a consumer of the library, if I want to have some final set of attributes, right?
Yeah.
And I don't see why I would prefer using OpenTelemetry collection semantics that are weird to my .NET I versus using a dictionary that I'm using every day and I know how it works.
So the dictionary, for example, will not keep the order of how you added the attributes.
Oh, so
I think there is also, I think this is raised last review about like, you know, maybe there will be some limitation to have how many attributes in the list, and the order will be very important at that time if you want to have this limitation.
Okay, then the list.
Even what?
What then I would use the list if I care about order.
Because the list, if you want to also about like, you know, setting the old value again, I mean, you have to do it manually.
But the thing is, most of the time when I create this list of activities, it's all done in a single place in code. It's rarely a thing that like goes through 5 different layers of system to collect values. Right? So what I imagine myself doing is I have a method, I have a couple values, I put them into a list, and that's it. I don't do some crazy complicated calculations to figure out the values.
Okay.
Like how often would you need to remove an item from this list versus just adding stuff?
Yeah, I don't know the answer for this question. I mean, like, I imagine like OpenTelemetry specs added those for some good reason, but I don't know what's the reason.
So my question is like, why do we need the collection in general? Like, it seems like the pattern that we have on activity is that there are methods, and then there's basically just a way to retrieve the existing items as an enumerable. So it seems we're getting away with not having the notion of a collection to begin with. And
if you go down a little bit, I mean, you will see activity event and activity link. I mean, yeah, here. So you construct the activity event or activity link and passing this attribute. So you have to get the list of the attributes before creating those. So you have to have a way to create this list. Yeah, I mean, like, if we think that like we don't have to be 100% like conforming about like the behavior of the OpenTelemetry, so that's fine, but we have to be explicit about that. And
How is ordering used in OpenTelemetry?
Yeah, as I mentioned about like one of the scenarios, like you could set some limitation on the number of attributes you have in the list. And at that time, the order will be important because like what's added first, it will be a higher priority to stay in the list if you cut the rest. But
And that's a common need in OpenTelemetry to cap the total attribute count and just kind of truncate something off of that.
I would say one common need would be checking the actual type and see if this is something we support or not. For example, if the user added some attribute which cannot be serialized, we might need to handle that.
Can we do it in constructors of link and event?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so Riley, you are saying like the order is not that important?
I think the order is important. However, I think the scenario probably is not the most frequent one. And I think there might be a more frequent thing is we want to enforce the type. Like certain types should not exist in the attribute.
Yeah, and this would be more implementation details in the OpenTelemetry side, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I will say, like, in general, like, I'm not a fan of super nested generics like enumerable of key value pair of string comma object because they're not pretty to construct. So in that sense, having a collection type makes sense, but I again agree with Pavel that it seems a bit weird to have a collection type that has very odd semantics. Like, usually when you have a dictionary and you add something with a null value, it doesn't magically delete the key.
Ima, can we just do order dictionary of TKTL, please?
I mean, we do have that already, right? I mean, in the sense, like, there already are kind of... I mean, my first question is what semantics do we have? Can the same key exist multiple times? Because if so, then it doesn't even work as a dictionary, right?
Right.
So if my understanding based on what was said earlier, it seems like you can have the same key multiple times. Is that correct, or is that not correct?
No. So in OpenTelemetry, you cannot have the same key more than once. In .NET activity, you can have multiple tags that have the same name.
Gotcha. And yeah, any reason why we didn't take dictionary here? Why did we take enumerable of key value pair? Because are there any other types people actually use today for this?
Yeah, as we said, that the order it was one of the reasons to do that. Dictionary will not give you the order, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So
it'll give you the same order as enumerable, right? Because
well, the interface doesn't specify it, so yes, in principle, you could imagine there's somebody implementing an iDictionary that does that, right? enumerable also doesn't make any guarantees on ordering either. It depends on what implementation you pass to it, right? If you bake it by an array, then
right.
Trivially
this
the order is
why
guaranteed.
I suggested to add the collection, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like that's why I'm generally I'm not opposed to having a custom collection type that makes guarantees about order and other stuff. But like, I will say to me, like, calling a method called add with a null value that now results in this key being deleted seems fairly odd. Calling the setter with a null value and the item being deleted, maybe, But that one is also more like a reflection maybe of the fact that null is not a valid value to begin with, right? That's more like how the old dictionary, aka hash table worked, right? Where you can't differentiate between a key having the value null and the key not being in the hash table, because either way the return value would be null. And if that's the behavior you want, then that seems fine. I mean, that's what I'm saying. For the setter, I can probably get behind that, but if you say add should remove the thing if the value is null, that would be very weird.
Right. Okay. Okay, so from this discussion, I'm seeing like, we don't have to expose this collection, and we will leave it to the consumers of our APIs to create the list themselves and whatever rules they want.
I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, to me, the collection would be fine. I wouldn't call it attributes probably, because we just said we don't want to have attributes. It would be probably a tags collection or something. But like, it's the same. I think having a collection type wouldn't be bad. I would probably still make it implement iDictionary, because you can, right? And that basically gives people, generally speaking, the right semantics that they want. And then the only thing you would say is I would not have the set method. I would just follow the normal patterns, and I would basically just say, set with an indexer or whatever. If you set it to a null value, you just basically delete the key. And then the thing you have to basically do, I think, in order to be consistent, is saying if anybody asks for a key that doesn't exist, you also return null.
Right, but I wouldn't use iDictionary for that, right? I mean, like, I read-only collection will be fine with that, right? I can stay. I mean, I can still have the indexer on it, and.
Well, I mean, that's the thing with interfaces, right? It makes no. I mean, we already have, at least in the non-generic case. I'm not sure for the generic case, but we do have implementations of iDictionary, the non-generic one that is order preserving.
Okay.
So I think that's, I forgot what the type is. We have this weird type in the BCL that you can either index by key or by index. And so that's, I think it's used somewhere in the networking stack, probably for very similar reasons, because headers are usually also order dependent. But like, yeah, it's just, I mean, the question is also like, do the generics buy you anything? You can probably just get away with iDictionary to begin with. But I think having a custom type that avoids these super nested generics, I think is probably useful for the API. The only thing I would say is, like, make sure these collection types, generally gel with the BCL, right? They follow normal conventions. You can new them up. You can use collection initializer syntax for those. And then I think it might be more usable than the raw enumerable you have here.
One use for raw enumerable might be implementing it on existing things. It's kind of
right.
Like a little bit of a stretch, but we did this for perf in other places. Like value task source, for example, we implemented that on existing objects and reused. So maybe if you have an object that kind of already has attributes, but then enumerable is not the best interface to do it. At least would be better. So.
Yeah, I mean, like, even if you think enumerable of key value pair is the ideal thing for those kind of situations, I would probably still suggest having an overload that would just take the whatever the collection type is called, because if somebody is new to this and they just do a new activity event, and then they see basically enumerable of key value pair of string comma object, they have no idea how to get one, right? I mean, yes, some people now they can just new up an array, but like, it's much nicer if you see, oh, there's another overload that takes an activities attributes collection. Let me just new this guy up, right? And then immediately have a useful type that you can pass in. But that doesn't mean we have to remove. Like, basically, what I'm saying is, even if we add the collection type, we don't have to remove the one that takes enumerable. We could still have it as an overload.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I'm fine with it.
So I guess I'm fine with the collection as a proposal. I'm not fine with the shape.
Yeah. What changes you want to have?
Okay, let me just write down what we just said. Should be renamed. to something tags.
Activity tags collection. Yeah.
Yeah, that would work for me.
Mhm.
Activity tags collection.
Wait, how is it? What's the appropriate name on the activity event that exposes this dictionary? Is it attributes or tags?
We said that we will have tags, the names tags there.
So
Right.
do we need to have constructor parameter also named as tags? I mean, on activity event and on activity link.
Yeah, we will call it tags. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like we will use tags all the way in our APIs. We will not use attributes.
I mean, my other question is, so what is your expectation for the constructor? So they take this new collection type and then they copy the contents, or what happens with the content?
For the collection itself?
Well, for activity event and for activity event, basically, does it copy the contents, or does it store the attributes collection directly on activity
No,
event?
just store it. I mean, we are trying to be performant. I mean, like we will not do any copying or anything. I mean, we'll just keep the reference for what they passed to us.
So is the collection then mutatable, or is it init only?
It's mutable, yeah,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, we'll be clear about like if you pass us mutable and mutated later, this will be reflected on the activity event or activity link. Yeah, this is the same case for other languages. I mean, like we asked about like Python and Java. I mean, so they doing the same. I mean, they don't copy the list or make it read only.
So that would also mean that on activity we would return tag objects then stood as an enumerator of key value pair of string comma object, or are we already exposing this as activity tags collection as well?
No, we will not expose it as collection there because we want to reduce the confusion while you want to set a new tag there. So people can get confused about like to get the collection and set the attributes there or the tags there. So we are trying to avoid to have two ways to set the tags on the activity. Is this clear or?
Yeah.
So we still, I mean, like tags objects will return I enumerable, not returning collection.
Okay. So the collection is nullable, which is weird.
Why?
Because it's normally not something we do, but I guess if you accept a null enumerable, I guess you can also accept a null.
Yeah, collection.
Yeah. But why do you? I mean, why is it not optional at that point? Why do I have to pass it in at all? It seems almost like you want an overload that just doesn't have them to begin with.
Yes, I think we in the last time when we reviewed that, we said that we need to have overload for the constructor, but I don't remember why we said that. Not optional parameter. But yeah, I mean, like, if there is no objection, we can make this optional parameter. I mean, I don't mind.
No, IMA means another that doesn't have a parameter versus a parameter that is optional. Like, you have another constructor that just takes name and keep the current one as is.
Yeah, either that or, I mean, like, it's a bit weird right now because you have basically overloads that take datetime offset and some don't take datetime offset. So either you go all the way, you just say, okay, let's just have a very simple constructor for name, and then we only have one other constructor that takes name, optional datetime offset, and optional attributes. Because otherwise, or you just go all the way and just say we have all 4 overloads. Which is probably what I would do.
go with the 2.
By 2 you mean name and the other ones?
Name as the only parameter to the simplest constructor.
Yep.
And then timestamp and attributes both being defaulted.
And so datetime
assuming that the timestamp value that you use as the default is actually defaultable. If the other constructor uses datetime offset.utc now, that's not easily expressible via a default parameter.
Well, that's why you could say, you could make it nullable, right? You could say datetime offset null means default.
Right.
Okay, this sounds reasonable.
All right, then scroll further. Activity link, I guess it's the same argument here.
That's the same, yeah, exactly the same.
So I guess attributes should also be optional here, right?
Yeah.
All right. So.
Yeah, this last one. Okay, so just to give some idea about like what we are trying to do here. So when you try to create a new activity, you call activity source dot start activity, and one of the parameters you pass is the parent context. Context has like trace ID, span ID, and whatever state and flags. And later about like if anybody listening, there is any listener, I mean the listener will get a callback with these parameters, including the parent context. And the listener can decide if we need to create the activity or not. And if decided to create the activity, we will create the activity using this context, which is it includes the trace ID. This is the important thing. So whatever we pass, it go to listener, we create the activity and we use the trace ID that it's passed in the API. We got the scenario about like, you know, when you don't when you don't have a parent, I mean null parent, this means that we are passing the default context, which doesn't have trace ID or span ID or anything. And at that time, the listener will get this callback and will have the empty or defaulted context. And this, I mean, like, you know, in most of the cases, this is okay. But we got some cases like in OpenTelemetry, they implementing what they call it probability sampler, which is listening to the activity creation. And they decide about sampling in or out according to the trace ID part of the decision. So they want to get a valid, all the time, a valid trace ID while calling them. So this means that if we pass the default context, this will not be any helpful for them, and they will not be able to take any decision to decide to sample in or out this activity. So the proposal here is to have in the listener itself to have some property telling if we need to create a trace ID before calling the listener. in case of we have default context. So if you have default context and this property is set to true, so we will generate a new ID for a trace ID for that and passing to the listener. The reason that we didn't do that by default and we have this property because like generating a new trace ID is costly. I mean, like it have a cost. I mean, it's not free. We will have to do allocation and take some time to allocate to generate like random trace ID. So this is why we making this property. I mean, making this behavior as opt-in behavior. So if somebody want to ensure that getting a valid trace ID all the time, so they have to set this property on the listeners they are using. Is this clear or?
I'm slightly lost.
Okay, so let me explain more about. So OpenTelemetry have this property sampler, okay? And this sampler take decision about to sample in or out the activity according to the trace ID, right? So if we passing to the listener or this sampler the trace ID which is invalid one or defaulted one, they will not be able to take the decision to sample in or out. And the case that we send the default context today to the sampler is when we have a null parent. I mean, there is no parent, and we just send the default context, which doesn't have the trace ID or span ID. And this making a problem for this sampler. So we want to make sure that if the sampler want to get all the time a valid trace ID, they want to set this property to true, and we will ensure sending a valid trace ID to them. And if they decided, the sampler decided to sample in and create the activity, we are going to create the activity using the generated trace ID.
But this random trace ID wouldn't affect the sampler's decision, right? It wouldn't make the right decision anyway because there is no information it relies on. There is no parent, correct?
No, the probability sampler is depending on the trace ID. It doesn't matter if it is generated randomly or not. It just have some way, I mean, like to generate the decision according to what value inside the trace ID.
Oh, according what would the trace ID be?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so why can't we? I mean, wouldn't just using the random class and deciding based on that give the same result?
You mean the sampler generates the trace IDs themselves, or something?
I mean, or just use whatever random get next int and the probability they have. It would give the same. It would produce the same amount of instrumented activities that us generating the activity ID would, but unfortunately, it would lose the connection between activity ID. But is that connection important? Or is that just how the sampler worked before, and it doesn't really matter if we keep the same algorithm as long as we sample the same % of activities?
So actually it's required for like when we create downstream further activities, they will share the same trace ID as the parent. So if the sampler just creates a random ID without taking the actual trace ID, then it will result in inconsistent sampling of child activities. Because when the child is created, the sampler, which decides whether the child is sampled in or not, it would be looking at the actual trace ID of the activity, whereas the parent would have created like some random number. So to ensure both are sampled in together or sampled out together, we need to use the same trace ID in the parent and child. So it's totally fine if the parent, if the parent sampler just generates a random ID, but then there should be a way to tell the activity creation mechanism that this is ID I used, so please use this as the trace ID should you choose to create the activity.
Do we have? I think there was at some point there was an overload of the sampler that returned additional information. Did we remove it? Like, I think it returned attributes or like sample result with attributes. Can we use that?
Like in OpenTelemetry, probably. I need to check whether that is still part of the spec. I still remember seeing that. Yeah,
because that seems like a place to put information like this, maybe.
Not sure how would I solve that in application sites. Like application sites have like a binary result, like sampled in or out. There is no other place to put attributes.
I mean, I understand. I definitely understand your use case. I'm just, again, worried about making the entire goal of this endeavor was to make subscription and production APIs simpler. If we start adding all the knobs and features to enable particular use cases, are we gonna make it harder, or is this feature important enough that it's worth doing that?
Are you concerned that this is like we are adding too many like API changes? Because I'm guessing these are things which like library authors would never care about.
It's an API change. It's more than it's like a super targeted API change to enable this particular implementation of sampler to work. And like, would anything else use this parameter, or is it just for a probability sampler that bases its probability activity ID?
Yeah,
like,
from
is this the only?
I mean, that's the only use case which I can think of. Like both application sites and OpenTelemetry, they both depend on the ID to make the sampling decision.
Yeah, this is kind of my worry, that it's not a general purpose API. This is a way to work around the difficulty with implementing this particular sampler. And maybe it's worth it. But I wonder if there are other ways to achieve it.
Is there any proposal like to get the same effect? Okay. Yeah.
Like it's without it. It's a lot of there is a lot of implementation detail. But can you remind us, Tarek, what's our sampling interface? Like what do we take and what do we return when we ask sampler for whether activity should be created or not?
I think we send all information about like the context, the links.
The entire activity creation options.
Yeah.
Is there an API listing somewhere we can take a look on? Yes.
Okay. I pasted some link. I think it's pointing to the sampling specification.
But I mean our API, the ones we added to activity source.
Ah, okay. Sorry.
Like in .NET, how does that look?
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm somewhat at loss here too, where it's like, where are we going with this? Like, I mean, on the one hand side, a single property is not bad. On the other hand, like, given how much time we spent talking about it, like, it's clearly not something that people necessarily will quickly understand what it does. But then again, it's a single property, so it's also not like the world is ending.
Yeah, I think from the property name, it can be easier to understand what it means. I mean, like, at least for me.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, part of the suggested names, I mean, like, generate trace ID for root context, for example. I mean, like, it's clear about, like, what it means.
Yeah, unless there's a I mean, normally the kind of knobs that we have in the BCL is naming and place where we put stuff. So if something is more advanced, we try to hide it by putting it somewhere else if we can, or by making the naming at least somewhat clear that this is something you need to read some docs on. In this case, it doesn't seem there's an obvious way where we can, where we can put the API somewhere else.
Right, but activity listener is the right way to put this property if we need to. I mean, like,
right.
I'm not seeing any other place you can set it there. And as I mentioned about, like, if nobody cares about the scenario at all, they don't have to do anything. But if somebody needs some specific scenarios that we are trying to enable here, I mean, they will need to learn about that.
Yeah, I think the only problem with that is like, if somebody would have had this issue, would they know that this is the property they need to set? And that one I don't have an opinion on because I'm not an expert.
Yeah, I don't think it will be super clear. I mean, people jump to use it and do it. I mean, like mapping their scenario to this property, it's not easy. I see that, but I don't know if there is any other better way.
Yeah, I mean, given that I also have no better option here, like, Pavel, how strongly do you feel about this being problematic? Otherwise, I would just say, let's just...
Considering, I just took a look at the activity listener interface. It's complicated enough already, so...
It's already... the damage has been done, is that the argument?
The other option is, currently we return an enum, the sampling callback. Like, if we decided to return a struct that has multiple things, maybe we can put it there, but that's even bigger change, so...
Yes.
I don't have a better alternative. But do we have, is root ID exposed in any other property name? Like, what is the actual property name on activity context that gets populated?
I don't think we have root ID anywhere.
Like, this property name should at least correspond to what we're gonna set.
Yeah, this is why, I mean, if you look, we have suggesting some other names in the comment. So maybe generate trace ID for root context. This is the most one I like, actually, because it's telling the purpose of this property. I mean, like, you need to generate the trace ID for root context.
What's the type of activity trace ID?
It's activity trace ID.
I mean, what's inside of it?
It's just a string.
Wrapped in a struct?
Yeah, a struct wrapping string, yes.
What if it can wrap something that's not a string and doesn't require an allocation? And we can...
So how you are going to send it to the list?
So let's say it wraps, I don't know, a byte array somewhere in the pooled space. And we point to that byte array before calling the sampler. And if the sampler decides to include this activity...
you send this byte array to the sampler?
You don't? Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, make it lazy. Materialize it when somebody asks. It's the same amount of allocations, right? If someone needs to look at the string, it has to be a string. But if we can, for example, if the sampler can look at the activity ID as bytes, that's a way to make it faster. So what I'm saying is, can we make so that an initialized activity trace ID still has some implicit value that's random?
Yeah, but this random value can change over the time, right? I mean, like, it's not just one random thing. I mean, we generate once. It can be generated multiple.
Right, but you don't have to allocate to generate a random value.
How you will avoid that? I mean, you will get like a memory array pool or something like this?
Or you generate a long, right? Or two longs, and store them as value properties.
And every time you want a new random one, you will generate a new one?
You call the same, yeah, you call the same create random.
Okay, so just to understand.
So imagine GUID. GUID doesn't allocate when you generate it, but you can create a random instances of GUIDs. I'm talking about the same thing. Like GUID struct is what I mean.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to understand if we go with that. I mean, so what's your suggestion is to generate this random all the time and don't have this property, or what? I mean,
yeah, that's what I would suggest. Always pass something that looks correct, and then if sampler decides to use that.
But generating random also is has a performance concern. I hear that multiple times. So you need to generate random all the time then. I mean, when you have a default context, which will be a performance issue. I mean, the whole issue providing this property is to avoid the performance penalty. I mean, when you can.
Sure, but like at first I thought it was applications. If it's about random being slow, then I don't know. Then yeah, but
yeah, I mean, we know that. I mean, like Noah already measured that. I mean, and he's trying to look at enhancing how we generate the random stuff. But
okay,
yeah,
if it's to prevent
right.
random from being called, then yeah, I'm not sure I can offer anything else.
Yeah. So which name you prefer now? I mean, like I prefer generate trace ID for root context, but I don't know what others may like other name or suggest a new name or something like this.
So one name that was suggested in chat was auto-generate root context trace ID.
Yeah.
I mean, it's long, but I mean, for an advanced feature, I think long is not bad.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
I mean, at least it seems like the closest to what you said in text.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's all for this review. So the only open issue is activity kind setter. I mean, we will take it offline and we'll decide about it.
Seems reasonable. So let me just add a bunch of all right, so let me just scroll down to the thing to make sure that what I wrote down captures what we talked about.
Okay. Yeah, tag object, it should return I enumerable, not I enumerated, just in case.
Sorry.
No, it's my fault. I mean, I know that I wrote it like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think I noticed that, but I did not fix it actually. Innumerable. And they're missing a semicolon. Actually, I'm missing more one semicolon. All right. So then, this is it. We have 10 more minutes. Maybe we can approve the other one. Steven, are you on the call by any chance?
He's not.
Then we'll skip this one.
I have a 5-minute one.
Yeah, I think this one here might also be 5 minutes if we actually, because I think we talked about this in an email already.
Yeah, I'd appreciate if we can get through this one. We can
So-
unblock for now.
Last time what we did was this. So we basically said we have HTTP request options implementing iDictionary of stream comma object. Because I think the concern that Stephen had is we don't want to duplicate the properties storage. We would like to have a single storage for these things. But the single storage one that we have is basically untyped, right? And so one of the major values that HTTP request options would add that things are strongly typed by using the generic here. And of course they messed up the signatures, but that's irrelevant. And then basically the idea is that we said this guy is settable because the expectation is that things like HTTP extension methods we have for JSON, they would eventually construct a message, but they would just get the options in and then basically pass it on this way. And then the feedback that the networking folks had was there was 3 issues, I believe, and I remember one I don't remember. I think one was just we just missed one of those types. We didn't actually declare
The
the
options
key.
key.
So that one was missing. And then you wanted to make this also editor browsable never, and you didn't want to make this setter settable. So I think the API shape that was proposed in return to this one was this one. This one basically just lists the key. We still miss the generic argument here, but that doesn't matter. And then basically the idea is that this guy would be editable browsable never, and this guy would be not settable, right? So my concern so I'm fine with everything here except for this one being missing, because I still struggle with the notion of how would this work then for things like HTTP client extension methods, where the whole point of the APIs is that the consumer doesn't have to deal with the message directly, but they still want to control some of the options. And so the idea that we had was that we would take the options in, and then deep down in one of the extension methods, worker horse methods, where the message actually gets constructed, that's where we would basically take these options and put them into the message. So one option we have is we can say, okay, the HTTP request options is an iDictionary already, so you can, of course, trivially enumerate it and copy the values over. The problem is we also said we want an explicit interface implementation of this to promote the typed API surface, but that will make it really ugly for consumers to effectively transfer the keys from one to the other, because you basically have to downcast this guy here to an iDictionary of string comma object, which isn't necessarily super intuitive.
I mean, couldn't we solve that with a copy from method on HTTP request options to copy from another options?
Yeah, I suggested a set items method that takes the options.
Just like a copy constructor.
Yeah, copy constructor wouldn't help you though, right? Because you already have the instance. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you just want to concatenate, I suppose. Yeah, I mean, the reason we suggested getting rid of the set is that none of the other collection types in HTTP client are settable right now. They're just kind of lazy initialized behind the scenes for you.
So that one I agree with in
but-
principle, but I don't think we think of options as a collection really, right? It's just that it's it's an open-ended struct, really, right? That's, I think, the way to think about this, because we want it typed, right? And we
I guess the question is, will this be initialized once and then just reused for tons of requests? Pranav seemed to think that that was probably not the case in the majority of uses. So we figured it would be safer to just not have a set now, and we can add it later if people asked for it.
So maybe I'm missing it, but so basically you're saying you will, the vast majority of things would not have an options instance, and that you can still do that, right? Because lazy just means first time somebody calls the getter, you initiate it, right?
Right.
So you can still have a setter for that, right?
Yeah, we could. We didn't see a super immediate need. I understand that you're thinking about extension methods. One thing that we want to tackle in probably the .NET 6 timeframe is we have users who want to set like per request headers while still using convenience methods and things like that. So the thought was that we could tackle all of that in one and kind of come up with a model for how to pass all of these request-specific things in a way that we don't have tons and tons of extra methods every time we want to add something new.
I thought that we landed on this design because we thought that is the way we would do that. No?
I can't recall.
Because I mean, like, I think we landed on this one here.
That.
Yeah, I think so. I think last time we talked about this, Stephen brought this up and said basically we already have a way to do generic things with the request. And I think originally I forgot what they actually linked here, right? Proposal 1. Proposal 1 had this very specific instance of the handler. We didn't like that one. Then proposal 2 was basically more generalized. So we say, okay, we have these request options that we can now pass into all these methods that do anything. Then we said we don't like that either, because that seems now every time we do anything, we add these ginormous numbers of overloads. And then we said, well, maybe we just put them on the message. And if we put them on the message, then basically the parties that care about this can take them in. The parties that don't care. And then this way it's similar to, let's say, our extension methods for JSON serialization, where we have one overload that doesn't take the JSON options and one that does. If the default options work for everyone, then they don't have to pass them in. And it will be similar here. If you actually need to pass in per request thingies, you do, and if you don't, then you don't, right? But like basically this one is open-ended. We have strongly typed keys, and then it means you can almost pass any data you want to the request.
I mean, I can say that we do have the general guideline in the book of guidelines that collection properties should be get only,
right? And
should return not null and etc. And so that the general guideline would be more that we add a copy from or add range or something method that drains one HTTP request options into the one that was already built on the message.
Yeah, my thinking was that
because it would be the setter's weird, because if you set some properties already, the fact that properties and options are the same thing. So you called like properties.add and then something replaces options, where'd that property go? Like there's no, the things don't mix. And it's just back to all the stuff we were talking about with telemetry of like, it's fine as long as there's only one writer, but
right.
The moment that there's two, everything stops making sense.
Yeah, I mean, the initial proposal or counter proposal or whatever it was, we talked about adding first class methods on HTTP client, and this being kind of a first step in the collection that you would pass to those that would be usable by all the different types of handlers. All we're saying is that we would love to add headers to that mix somehow, and we're just not ready to. So we don't want to add methods now when later on we would have to add more. And if we did add the methods directly onto HTTP client, we could use internals to construct things optimally if those get passed in. So you wouldn't need a setter in that case.
Yeah, I guess I'm fine with not having a setter. Like I care about the scenario more than anything, right? Like it just seems the setter seems the most obvious way of doing it, but I buy the problems of that. So yeah, my suggestion would be at the very minimum we should have a method on HTTP request options that basically takes another HTTP request options and just effectively calls the set method in a loop. It doesn't quite do that because it's generic, but like that would be logically what ends up happening. So basically, if you configure the key and then the request options you're taking in also defines the key, well, that would override it. It would not cause an exception. It would just replace the contents. So that's why I would probably call it set items, because the idea would be everything you have that's not in the one that's being passed remains, and everything that is new will be added, and everything that's already there will be overridden. That
That's
seems
fair.
generally the semantics you want.
Pranav, do we think people need to do that sort of copying of options?
I don't think so, but like we don't really know how people are going to end up using this. I'm sorry if my mic is like really terrible, by the way.
No, it's fine.
Oh, you have not the worst mic. There are worse mics around. So when you say it's not common, like, I mean, I'm somewhat confused. I mean, like, you're basically saying if somebody needs to pass in data per request, like, wouldn't you by default not want to replace, just add the new options on top of it?
Right. No, I meant like it isn't very common to sort of build a pipeline of somebody sets some values and then you go and like override it and so on and so forth. You might want to be able to like do things like override values in general because you decide what values you want to send.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You're basically saying for the most part you have 0 options and then you just set the 5 you care about and that's it. There's no replacement or anything going on.
Yeah.
No, I buy that. Like, I think to me it's more like overriding everything on the request message. If that's the only way of doing it, to Jeremy's point, that might bite us later, right? Because if the semantics we have, it's just we replace the ones you gave us, then if anything ever is present already, like at least it doesn't get dropped on the floor. And
yep.
All right, so any objections with like public void set items, HTTP request options?
I think my only objection would be if we don't see an immediate use for it by the domain expert, then I would prefer to leave it off and add later.
So, I mean, as I said, like the immediate need would be we would want to add it to the HTTP extension methods because that's the Blazor scenario, right? So like this one was added specifically for Blazor support, right? And we expect people to use these extension methods in the Blazor app. So we would have to add overloads to them that take HTTP request options. And then the question is, how do we compose them with the underlying request message? And as I said on email, you just have to downcast the thing from options to iDictionary of string comma object, but that seems
ugly.
a bit hacky.
Yeah, I mean, if we see cases where users would want to like have one options with all of their stuff in it and just constantly copy it to other options, then as I suppose that API could be used, but that seems...
No, that's not the scenario, right?
Seems a little inefficient.
The scenario is you call a method on HTTP client where you don't have a request message at all, right? Like the caller just says get as JSON async and passes in a URL and maybe some JSON options, right? So now the person wants to say, oh, I want to configure my whatever one of those WebAssembly settings were. Like I forgot, like some of these, what was it?
Say integrity or something like that. So I think we ended up like dropping that entirely though. That was like the API, which was extension, like adding the HTTP request options to get, I guess, was being dropped.
Yeah, so the original design was based fully on extension methods to set properties, but then the other proposal, I think, in this API was to add, I think maybe a send async that took the options, and we dropped that, at least from the BCL library.
Right, but like, do we keep the one on system net HTTP JSON? Like,
I don't think there was a proposal for JSON in here, was there?
there was one because like the get JSON, and I think we said like, so the original proposal had that in there. Just
I mean, I
is
think I
missing that.
kept the original proposals. This one here.
Yeah,
I
like
think.
that one.
Yeah, so this is the one where we basically said, yeah, so this is my example effectively, Corey, right? So like this guy, you basically pass in the options and the consumer has no, like there's no message in here, right? The implementation of this method eventually probably constructs a message, but that's basically the part where you would have to stitch in these request options with the one on the message.
Yeah, so I don't like this because we're going to in the future add another overload of this that also takes headers. So I'd rather avoid having two overloads that, you know, people have to use IntelliSense to figure out what they're doing.
Well, then let me go back all the way then. Like, do we need this API at all then? Like, forget about this one method. Like, do we need the request options at all?
I think the request options will be used in the future API. So I'm fine with keeping this here. I just don't know if we need the overloads.
And then like there was also like some pushback from the mono team about having like a stringly typed dictionary. Like they wanted something that felt a little more first class because we still need the ability to configure these options.
Well, that's what this is, right? This is not stringly typed, right? This is strongly typed.
Right. No, I meant like you asked like, do we still need this? So yes, like there is some incentive. It doesn't complete the story, but like if there are plans to like evolve this API, like I don't want to like sort of
so maybe
be stubborn about this.
Maybe I'm confused then. So like, okay, so let's say we add these APIs as they're proposed here, right? Let's say we have them and we don't have this method that I'm asking for. So what is the end-to-end scenario that uses these APIs in .NET 5 then?
The browser HTTP handler basically exposes extension methods that configures these things and then uses them on the consumer end, like in the implementation.
So, and what would they look like? Like, I mean, they're not listed here, right? So like, what would that be?
Right, so like that API is completely new, like the type isn't public as yet. So I was gonna bring that up separately. Like does that help?
I guess the reason I'm asking is because I'm still struggling with like how this is being composed. Is the idea that whoever consumes this API then end to end already has access to the message? Because that's kind of what has to happen, right?
Yes, it does. So it's an HTTP handler on the other side. So there is like the user code on one end, the HTTP handler on the other hand. The HTTP handler currently uses like the dictionary to like read these properties. So it's just a loose bag. And we don't want a loose bag because it feels like unstructured. Right. We wanted to bring a little more structure to it. So the property fills that gap. So, and then you use the options as a way to sort of make that like experience a little nicer. And then in 5.0, maybe in 6.0, I guess we improve on that and then figure out how to pass like these options through get from JSON async and so on.
So is then the idea that effectively the party that deals with this and the party that deals with this are both infrastructure, so the end user doesn't actually do anything like this?
Probably
the
not.
End user would set options, right? They would set fetch options if they need them.
Yeah.
So yeah, but where? So I guess I'm still at loss. Like the fetch options are what, wrapping this one here, or are they actually just this one?
Well, presumably there will be some sort of Blazor options dot blah blah blah, and each of those blah blah blahs is an options key. So you would call request message dot options dot set Blazor options dot blah 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 value.
Yeah, I get that. And then the question is the instance of the request options. Where does this guy go then?
It's tied to the request message.
Yeah, I guess that's the
you would
thing
always have to have a request message to use it.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm heading, because I mean, my understanding is that for infrastructure code it makes sense because at the very bottom there's a message, right? So that's why you always have pretty much access to the message. But the end user code who actually issues requests from the browser, most of the time you want to stay as high level as you can, right? So like that's why these extension methods on HTTP client exist, so people don't have to actually construct the message by hand, right? So if we're saying that for the common cases where you want to configure something in the browser, you never have to use the request options because the underlying handler does the right thing anyway, then that's fine. But if we expect people in the browser who just want to set a Blazor option, if we now ask them, oh no, every method you have called so far that constructed messages for you, you can no longer do that. You have to actually construct the message yourself. Then that seems like a little bit of falling off the cliff, right? Because you just want to set this one thing, and then it's like, well, now you fall off, right? That's why I was asking for this extension method or this to basically where these things are being stitched together. Because it seems like the end-to-end here, if it's based on the message, that seems fairly low level for what people want to do.
I mean, needing to construct the message, it's not low level. It's really how you do anything today that you can't use one of the convenience methods on. And oftentimes the convenience methods don't do the right thing in terms of the response message, like error handling, things like that. So users really end up using it anyway.
Okay.
I agree with you that it would be nice if those could be made more usable. But I don't want to add convenience methods now and then have to add more overloads to them later.
Totally fair. Like, I mean, if you're basically saying that, if you're basically saying that the options people would set, if you're saying the people that would use these Blazor-specific options are already on the advanced path or would be very likely on the advanced path where they construct messages directly, then that makes perfect sense to me. I just want to avoid the thing where we now have this feature that is like 90% there, but then,
we
it's
wouldn't
not quite
want
there,
every
right?
user to have to take this path, right?
Right. So then, in that case, I'm fine with this as being proposed without the set items method.
Right. I mean, the extension methods today live on HTTP request message. So we kind of already expected users that were configuring it today already were constructing these the messages by themselves. So the experience isn't any worse, but it would have been nice to have had the glue code that on get from JSON async.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't want to be put my foot down and say no, this needs to be here in 5.0 if there are plans to have all the API in 6.0.
Yeah, I guess that's my point, right? So if I just want to avoid that we ship a broken end-to-end, right? But in 5.0, if you think there is an end-to-end, but it's the thing that's missing is a feature that lives on in the next release, then that's fine. But because one of the problems I have with this issue here is that it's on the one hand side very specific to WebAssembly, but then we ended up with this super generic API, so I no longer see what the end-to-end is, and that's probably my fault. All right, so then let me just approve this as is.
There was one other change that was adding editor browsable never.
Yeah, that one
to the original properties.
Yeah, I don't think we heard from anybody here.
I mean, we've added EB never on things in the past, and then we get the issue that says please remove it because it's annoying my tooling of some sort. So it's if we've marked it as obsolete, I think that's enough. I don't we can do EB never in another release, but let's I think doing them both in the same one it just frustrates people.
So the reason we justify this is none of our built-in types actually use properties, and we don't know of any third-party handlers that use this either, or in general. So
your guess is
no one
will
is using
care?
it. Yeah, we think no one is using it at all right now. And it would be a little easier for users if they didn't see both properties and options and have to guess between the two and wait for a warning from obsolete attribute.
I mean, 6% is not nothing. It's quite a bit, actually. But yeah
that's higher than most of my types.
That's actually really interesting. I'm wondering what they're using it for.
So I mean, that's why it's moderately highly. It's not moderately highly used. That makes no sense. But it seems like it's high enough that it's concerning. I mean, personally,
it's not the end of the world if it's visible.
To me, honestly, the editor browsable is basically just to remove clutter from IntelliSense. That's really what it's for, right? Because it will not do it anywhere else. It will still show up in docs. It will still compile, right? But so the biggest mileage you get out of this one here is because it basically tells people they're doing the wrong thing. They should use the other one instead. And so I think that one is the thing we should be doing. And then editor browsable. Yeah, the problem is if you hide it and people ever have to use it, that's annoying. But I think in this case we convinced ourselves that that's never the case, because every time you pass in properties, you can now pass in options, because it trivially converts. So that should be fine. But like I agree with Jeremy. Every time we do it, we usually have to, do something later.
Yeah, I don't have like a
fine.
fundamental objection to it. I'm just pointing out every time I can think of that we've done it, and this could be observation bias. It's big. Someone has then complained, and we've backed off.
Okay.
I may just remember the backoffs.
All right, then we just leave it as this, and then if there's an issue, we can talk about it.
All right.
Yeah, looks
Thank you.
Alrighty, then
Thanks, guys.
that was intense, but at least we got somewhere. All right, thanks everyone.
All right. Bye bye.